You chose your parents, but why would you have chosen those specific parents? What were you thinking? Was there a method in your madness? Did your soul choose something in absolute wisdom? Did you know that this was going to be the completion lifetime where you were going to bring not just closure to your lifetimes, but to the entire lineage, which means that you would have to resolve everything that your mom and dad didn't energetically. I'll explain as we go on. And if you look at it, your parents tried to do that for their parents, who tried to do it for their parents. It keeps going back. Every generation tries. As children, we come in such innocence. We try to carry the wounds of our parents. It backfires. We become more wounded, amplifying the wound, passing that on to our children. So by the time it came to your life, to this life, what you're holding that needs resolution is at times going to feel so big. But before I even get into today's conversation, this is something I planned on sharing with you guys at the end, but I may as well start backwards. I may as well start at the end and end at the beginning then. I'm going to talk about your relationship to your mother, to your father, and to God. But let me talk about how I know what I know first. As a child, I spent many, many years being pretty damn sick, and properly sick. Sick so that I was on the brink of life and death for many years of my life. For many years, I spent more time at hospital than I did at home. And this gave me an opportunity to be where people are when they have an NDE, a near-death experience. And that is plugged into the heart, mind of God. I spent so much time there. And you know what? When you're there, you don't have questions. You don't think to ask things. Because why? You're plugged into the allness of creation. So often people look at me and they look at my content and they say, "Oh, Kerry, how do you know what you know?" And I honestly have spent so many years looking at people and saying, "How don't you know? How don't you see this? How don't you get this?" We've just had two very different experiences of life and lived in two very different worlds. And the world that I lived in was one that allowed me that experience of going beyond the veil and spending enough time plugged into that mind of oneness that I could see beyond the false matrix. And one of the things that I saw was this. I saw how before incarnation, we saw the life that we were incarnating into as a grid, almost like if you could imagine a tapestry made up of silver and gold thread. The silver thread, normally that would have been the father, and the gold, normally that would have been the mother. So we have these overlays, these intertwining threads of consciousness. And if you zoomed out, you could see this undulating pattern of energy that you knew this is the exact pattern that I need in order for me to springboard into my highest outcome. Sometimes we need the greatest discomfort in order to transcend that discomfort. And because we transcend that discomfort, it brings us into a higher reality that we wouldn't be able to access otherwise. That's why, or at least one of the reasons why, you chose not just this life, but those parents, because their patterning would form the foundation of your experience. So your mom, let's talk about her. She formed the foundation of your inner world. And your dad, he formed the foundation of your external world. So let's start by looking at the mother, because that's where you started. You started in utero, 9 months. You were swimming in a sea of her emotional energy. What she felt, you felt. She felt desperately alone and afraid, or euphoric and content. Whatever her feelings were, you were right in the waters of that emotional experience, so you felt it with her. Then when you were born, you developed your own imprint based on that. So either you mimicked it, you just carried on, because that became your pattern and you carried it on. In other words, you emotionally became the same as your mom. You handle things emotionally the same as your mom. You feel emotionally the same as your mom. Or you rebel against it and you go, "That was awful. I had a really difficult time in utero dealing with all of her emotions, so now I'm going to go and do the opposite." Either way, she's at the foundation of who you've become at the inner world, at the inner level. So this is your intuition. This is your self-esteem. This is your inner dialogue, but it's also the stuff that's so deep that you can't even articulate. It's the energetic world that you actually come from because you are energy. It's your relationship to spirituality and to God. It's your relationships, including your relationship to yourself, your relationship to animals, your ability to love, your ability to emote, your ability to feel what other people feel, your empathy, your compassion, your emotional understanding, your self-doubt. So anything that's a feeling, that's inherited directly from your mother. And then we can talk about your father and the blueprint of your father. And he is everything to do with the external world. So he is your relationship with money. He is your relationship with your job and your car and the way that you relate to the external world and how you live. Do you live in the inner world or the outer world? In other words, a lot of people do this and don't even know it. A lot of people live in the external world looking at themselves, right? So it's like they're not inside themselves because you need a very healed relationship with the mother in order to be here inside yourself. The relationship to the father, we tend to look at ourselves from the outside. So this can make us feel a little bit helpless, a little bit disengaged, a little bit disconnected. We perceive this sometimes as safer though, because we are a witness. So we're an outsider as opposed to the actual participant. The relationship to your father. Oh, this governs so much, including, people who need to go to the gym all the time because their body needs to look a certain way. That's very much the physical level. So emotional level mom, physical level dad. But you might say to me, oh, but I've got a lot of my dad's tendencies and traits. I do too, on both sides. I've got a lot of my mom's external world traits, a lot of my dad's internal world experiences that exists within me. So of course it's going to cross over. But what we're doing is we're looking at an overview of the imprints that you chose when you came in and why. So when you look at the relationship to your dad, what you're going to see is this is how I chose to see the external world, either because it was going to trigger the hell out of me and I was going to have to do something about this. I was going to have to completely recreate the reality that my dad showed me, or I was going to fall in line with it. So here's an example. A person with a very strong father figure, especially a boy with a very strong father figure, they tend to feel a deep sense of inadequacy, like I'll never measure up to my dad. They tend to feel a deep sense of failure, almost like they don't want to be in the world. So you can see all of these dynamics at play. This incredible, intricate kaleidoscope of energy that you so perfectly put in place because you knew that this is what you were going to purify. Almost like this grand melting pot, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, put it all together, and you're going to be the melting pot that not just brings integration to these two worlds, because ultimately aren't you here to bring the internal and external world into one place, to integrate the masculine and the feminine within you in order for you to find a sense of wholeness. So you can see how we've got these two imprints, and this is why so many people feel so divided, because we have moms and dads who very often were very different people at the fundamental level. So now it's kind of like we've got these two opposites that we somehow need to bring integration to. When we look at that external world, I want to give you an example because the father very much determines your relationship with money and with wealth and possessions and your home and your car and even your status and your desire for status or your lack of desire for status. That all comes from that blueprint. If I look at my relationship with my dad, who was the absent father, that absenteeism took up a lot of space. And so I always looked for stability. One of the first things I said to Brian when I first really let him into my world, for those of you who don't watch my channel regularly, Brian is my loving husband who I have such a remarkable relationship. But one of the first things I said to him was, don't leave. Whatever you do, just don't leave me. And it was such a vulnerable thing to say. And in fact, I spent so many months running away from him, just avoiding him and not going on dates with him because I was so scared. I knew I loved him, but I was so scared that he would go away because that's exactly what my dad did. So the foundation for your material world. Now, I had that absenteeism, so I always wanted to store things. I always wanted to overshop, and I always wanted to have lots of things, not realizing that I was looking for some kind of stability. I was looking for some kind of replacement for the stability of the father figure. So it's a really interesting thing, and it can go either way. There's no rule book that says, oh, your dad was like this, so now it's going to translate in your world like that. You get to look now. You get to look and go, okay, so if my father is the imprint that really shaped my relationship with the external world, then what was that about for me? You can start to bring all of those threads together and bring understanding to yourself. Should we talk about your relationship to God? This is such an interesting one because it actually brings both of the relationship with mother and father into the spotlight. Because it's a relationship of feeling, it's going to be very much about the mother, the mom. Your relationship with your mom is going to determine the ease of connection with the spiritual world. What's so interesting about this, though, is that we tend to have thoughts of Father God, even though we know now, okay, God is not a male, God is not a female, God is a being, God is an energy. The world that we grew up in held this archetypical view of God as a masculine figure, as a father figure. So we tended to overlay the relationship that we've had with our father onto the relationship we have with God. So was your father there? Was your father not there? Look at how that plays out in your relationship with God. You know, something that I have said to people for years and years and years is one of the greatest pains, the deepest wounds that a human being can bear is a common wound that we actually all share, and that is the wound of separation and abandonment and the idea of disconnection to God, the idea of disconnection to source. And that sent such a fracture into our psyche, into our emotional body, and we felt the repercussion of that separation for time immemorial. That really is the glue that holds the false matrix together. It's the idea of that and the pain of that separation. And that becomes overlaid into your relationship, specifically with the Father. So whether you're a female or a male, look at your relationship to your dad and look at your relationship to God. So some questions that I'm pretty sure you guys are going to have is, what if you were adopted? What if you had bad relationships? What if you had no relationships? What if you were adopted? It means that there are now two strands of energy. Remember I spoke about the imprint of the mother-father, strand of gold, strand of silver, but now you've got dual strands, and they're going to be very mishmashy because these are not the same people and they have got two totally different fields, but they still form a pattern, and that's what it means. You basically are holding now the imprint of, instead of 2, you're holding 4, because that's what you needed to create the exact imprint. What if you never knew your dad? What if you never knew your mom? Hell, what if your dad was a sperm donor and your mom never even knew your dad? It's still within you. That energy and imprint still exists within you. It's not dependent on how deep the relationship was, how good the relationship was, how long the relationship was. The relationship with your mom and dad exists within you even if they were absent. Even if they're bad relationships, a bad relationship is still a relationship. So what you're going to find is you may have to work extra hard in certain areas. So you may have to work extra hard at the emotional level, perhaps because there was a relationship with your mom that became distorted and wounded over time, or vice versa, a relationship with your dad. Maybe that was the relationship of pain. Then that's where you have to work extra hard to make your external world make more sense to you, be more viable to you, and a safe place for you to live. It all comes down to, where do you feel safe? And there are some people who don't feel safe in the external or the internal world because they've had really difficult relationships with both parents. And in that instance, you kind of got to push your way into one of those two worlds. You've got to almost override the existing pattern then, and you've got to force your way into one place. And you might feel like you don't belong anywhere and like you're in a little bit of limbo. But having a difficult relationship with a parent boils down to you having to work extra hard to bring healing and wholeness to how you relate to yourself in the world emotionally, or how you relate to yourself and the world at the physical level. The relationships were perfect. Whatever they were, however they were, whether they were there or they weren't there, those were the exact relationships that you needed to create the exact energy that you needed. So I want you please to have a look at these two relationships that forged you. Have a look at yourself through fresh eyes. Please don't get too analytical. The goal of this is not to go into analysis, just understanding. With understanding comes compassion, comes healing. Let it all come together for you and begin to hold gratitude and reverence for the parents that you chose. Whether those relationships were good or bad, those were the relationships that you knew were going to give you access to higher realms and higher frequencies, but it had to come in that way. And if you didn't have the mom and dad that you chose, you would have chosen two other people that would have created at least the same or similar patterning. That's what you were looking for. You were looking for that specific resonance, because that specific resonance, as painful as it was, is exactly what you needed in order to elevate you. There is a perfection in your life that I want you to see today from my heart, all the way into yours. So much love, everyone. Bye-bye for now. There's a video. I'm going to leave it up here. I think this is going to be a great follow-on to what you've just watched. Have your heart wide open with this.